Days after my daughter's charity ball for her non-profit organization, the accountant contacted me, trembling. "Ma'am, I need you to come to my office. Please don't tell your daughter anything." When I arrived, he said, "Promise me you won't call the police. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from." I should have known something was wrong when Sydney called me at 7 in the morning. My name is Helen Maloney, and at 63, I've learned that accountants don't make early morning phone calls unless the news can't wait. I was in my kitchen in suburban Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the windows of the craftsman house my late husband Robert and I had bought 40 years ago. The coffee was still brewing when my cell phone lit up with Sidney Hendry's number. "Mrs. Maloney." His voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "I need you to come to my office this morning. It's urgent." "Sydney, what's wrong? Is this about the quarterly taxes?" "No, ma'am. It's about your daughter's foundation." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Please don't tell Victoria you're coming. This is delicate." My stomach dropped. Victoria, my brilliant, ambitious daughter who had launched the Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund 3 years ago. The daughter who had made me so proud with her dedication to helping underprivileged students get college scholarships. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The drive to Sydney's office in downtown Portland felt like it took forever. Traffic on I-5 was its usual nightmare, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about the gala 4 nights ago, Victoria in her elegant navy dress, giving that passionate speech about the 42 students we'd helped this year. I'd donated $5,000 that night. I'd convinced 3 of my friends to write checks too. Sydney's office was in an older building near the waterfront, the kind with creaking elevators and frosted glass doors. His secretary wasn't at her desk yet. Sydney opened his door before I could knock, his face pale and drawn. He was 50-something, normally unflappable, the kind of man who wore bow ties and kept his desk meticulously organized. Today, he looked like he hadn't slept. "Thank you for coming," he said, ushering me inside quickly and closing the door. "Please, sit down." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, my purse clutched in my lap. "Sydney, you're frightening me. What's going on?" He sat down heavily, pulled off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. When he looked at me again, there was something like pity in his expression that made my chest tighten. "Mrs. Maloney, I've been your family's accountant for 7 years. I've handled your taxes, your investments, your late husband's estate. You've always been honest and forthright with me." He opened a thick folder on his desk. "Which is why this is so difficult. Just tell me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Victoria asked me to handle the foundation's books 2 years ago. Standard nonprofit accounting, filing the 990s, tracking donations, managing expenses. I was happy to help. She's always been very organized, very professional." He turned the folder around to face me. 4 days ago, I was preparing the annual filing when I noticed some irregularities. Small things at first, a pattern in the transfer dates, some unusual categorizations. So I dug deeper. My hands were shaking as I reached for the folder. Inside were dozens of bank statements, transaction records, spreadsheets covered in yellow highlighter. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Sydney leaned forward. "Evidence of systematic fraud, Mrs. Maloney. Over the past 3 years, approximately 75% of all donations to the Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund have been transferred into your daughter's personal accounts." The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at the numbers, at the highlighted transfers. $50,000 here, $30,000 there, dozens of them, hundreds of thousands of dollars. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Victoria wouldn't." "I have 3 years of records here. The pattern is consistent and deliberate." His voice was gentle but firm. "The money comes in from donors, sits in the foundation account for 2 to 4 weeks, then gets transferred to an account under Victoria's name. The remaining 25% goes toward legitimate expenses, enough to maintain the appearance of a functioning charity." I felt like I was going to be sick. "The scholarships? The students she talks about? Those exist," Sydney said. "But they're funded by the legitimate 25%, plus money from a separate grant program she has no connection to. Your daughter has been taking credit for scholarships funded by the state government." My mind raced back through 3 years of memories. Victoria's condo upgrade, her new car, the European vacation she said was a gift from her boyfriend, the expensive clothes, the exclusive gym membership. I'd assumed her marketing job paid well, but now, why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sydney's expression became even more grave. Because I'm legally obligated to report this to the IRS and potentially to state authorities by tomorrow morning. Once I do that, there will be an investigation. Victoria could face federal charges, wire fraud, tax evasion, theft by deception. She could go to prison for 10 to 20 years. The room tilted. Prison. My daughter. The girl I'd raised, who'd gotten straight A's, who'd been student body president, who'd volunteered at animal shelters and visited me every Sunday. I don't understand, I said. Why would she do this? I don't know, Mrs. Maloney. But I wanted you to see this first. You deserve to know before it becomes public, before the authorities are involved. You need to talk to Victoria. Tonight. I gathered up my purse with numb fingers, my mind spinning. Thank you, Sydney. I need to think. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I truly am. If there were any other way. I drove home in a daze. The rain had picked up, hammering against the windshield, but I barely noticed. How could Victoria have done this? How could the daughter I thought I knew be capable of such calculated deception? Back home, I spread the documents Sydney had let me copy across my dining room table. Numbers swam before my eyes. $847,000 total diverted over 3 years. Hundreds of donors defrauded, including me, including my friends. People who had trusted Victoria because they trusted me. I was reaching for my phone to call her when I noticed something odd in the paperwork. A secondary set of signatures on some of the transfer authorizations. Not just Victoria's name, but another. Sydney Hendry. My blood went cold. Why would Sydney's name be on these transfers? He was the accountant, sure, but he'd made it sound like he'd just discovered this fraud. Yet, here was his signature, authorizing money to move from the foundation account to Victoria's personal accounts, dated months ago. I grabbed another document, then another. Sydney's name appeared on at least 20 different transfer requests spanning the past year. The phone rang, making me jump. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Maloney? A woman's voice, crisp and unfamiliar. This is Detective Margie Ramos with the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your daughter's foundation. Can you come to the station today? My heart hammered in my chest. How did you... We've been investigating the Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund for 6 weeks. We have evidence of fraud, and we need your cooperation. This morning at 10, one of our witnesses contacted us with new information about your involvement. My involvement? The words came out as a croak. I'm not involved. I'm a donor. That's what we need to clarify, ma'am. We have documents showing transfers into your personal accounts as well. If you don't come in voluntarily, I'll have to issue a warrant. The line went dead. I stood there, phone clutched in my hand, staring at the papers spread across my table. Documents showing Victoria's fraud. Documents with Sydney's signature. And now the police claiming I was involved too. Someone was lying? The question was who? And what would happen when I started asking the right questions? I looked down at the papers again, and this time I noticed something else. A sticky note in Sydney's handwriting, partially hidden under a bank statement. Just 3 words, in his neat print. Check Rebecca's accounts. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, Thomas's wife, the woman who'd been managing Victoria's publicity for the foundation, who'd helped design the website, who'd been at every gala with her camera and her bright smile. What did Rebecca have to do with any of this? Outside, the rain hammered harder against the windows, and I realized with cold certainty that nothing about my family was what I'd believed it to be. I didn't go to the police station. Instead, I called my son. Thomas answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. Mom? It's barely 8 o'clock. I need to talk to you about Rebecca, I said, keeping my voice level despite the panic clawing at my chest. Can you come over? Alone? There was a pause. What's this about? Please, Thomas. Just you. Don't tell Rebecca. Another pause, longer this time. You're scaring me. Is everything okay? No, I said honestly. Everything is not okay. Can you be here in 30 minutes? I'll be there in 20. I hung up and stared at Sydney's note again. Check Rebecca's accounts. What had he found? And why would he point me toward my daughter-in-law if he himself was involved in Victoria's fraud? Unless Sydney wasn't the villain here. Unless someone had forged his signatures, used his position as the family accountant to create a trail leading back to him. My hands trembled as I made fresh coffee. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door pulling weeds from her garden despite the rain, oblivious to the fact that my entire world was collapsing. I envied her that ignorance. Thomas arrived in 18 minutes, his hair damp from the rain, worry etched across his face. At 35, he still had his father's gentle eyes and careful way of moving. He hugged me tightly at the door. "Mom, what's going on?" I led him to the dining room table where the documents still lay spread out like evidence at a crime scene. "Sit down. This is going to be difficult." Thomas sat, his eyes scanning the papers. "What is all this?" "Victoria's foundation," I said, my voice steadier now. "It's a fraud. She's been stealing from donors for 3 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars." His face went white. "That's impossible. Victoria would never. Look at the bank statements." I pushed the highlighted documents toward him. 75% of all donations went straight into her personal accounts. Sidney Hendry called me this morning to show me. He said he's legally required to report it to the authorities today. Thomas picked up the papers with shaking hands, his eyes darting across the numbers. I watched him process it, the shock, the denial, the slow, horrible acceptance. "Oh my word," he whispered. "Oh, Victoria, what have you done?" "There's more," I said. "The police called me an hour ago. They claim they've been investigating for 6 weeks, and they say there's evidence of my involvement. Transfers into my accounts." Thomas's head snapped up. "That's absurd. You've never been anything but a donor. I know that. You know that. But someone has fabricated evidence suggesting otherwise." I pulled out Sydney's note and handed it to Thomas. "And Sydney left me this. He wants me to check Rebecca's accounts." The color that had drained from Thomas's face didn't return. Instead, a different expression crossed his features, something between fear and reluctance. "Mom, I don't think—" "What do you know?" I asked sharply. "Nothing. I don't know anything." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Thomas Robert Maloney, you look at me right now and tell me the truth." He finally looked up, and I saw my little boy again, the one who'd never been able to lie to me successfully. "Rebecca has been stressed lately. Really stressed. She's been taking calls at odd hours, staying up late on her laptop. When I ask what's wrong, she says it's just work stuff. Website design projects running over deadline." "What kind of website design does she do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Non-profit sites, mostly. She did Victoria's Foundation website. That's how they became close. Victoria recommended her to some other organizations." Thomas rubbed his face. "Mom, are you saying you think Rebecca is involved in this?" "I don't know what I'm saying, but Sydney pointed me in her direction for a reason, and now I need to know why." I stood up. "Does Rebecca have an office at your house? A place where she keeps her work files?" "She has a home office, yeah. But Mom, we can't just go through her things. Your sister could go to prison," I said flatly. "And someone is trying to frame me as an accomplice. I need to know if Rebecca knows anything about this, and I need to know now." Thomas stood too, torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his family. "She's at a client meeting until noon. But if we do this and she finds out, then we'll deal with it. Let's go." The drive to Thomas and Rebecca's house in the Selwood neighborhood took 15 minutes. It was a charming bungalow they'd bought 2 years ago. Another thing I'd thought was the result of Thomas's engineering salary. But now I wondered, how much did website designers really make? Thomas's hands shook as he unlocked the door. Their golden retriever, Copper, bounded up to greet us, tail wagging. The normalcy of it all made my chest ache. What was I doing, sneaking into my daughter-in-law's office like a thief? But then I thought of Victoria in prison, of myself under investigation, and I kept moving. Rebecca's office was at the back of the house, a small room with a window overlooking their garden. It was meticulously organized: color-coded files, a pristine desk with 2 monitors, framed certificates on the wall for various web design achievements. A photo of her and Thomas on their wedding day sat beside her keyboard. "What are we looking for?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Financial records, maybe. Anything related to the foundation or to Sydney." I started with her filing cabinet while Thomas reluctantly opened her desk drawers. The files were all labeled: client projects, tax documents, insurance, household. I pulled out the client projects folder and flipped through. Website mock-ups, invoices, contracts. Everything appeared legitimate until I reached a section marked PNCEF, Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund. Inside were dozens of documents I didn't expect. Not just website materials, but donor lists with handwritten notes in the margins. Soft target, elderly, trusting. Good for 5K plus. Mention dead husband for sympathy. My stomach turned. These were manipulation notes. Rebecca had been profiling donors, including me, to determine how much money could be extracted from them. "Thomas," I said quietly, "look at this." He came over, read the notes, and his face crumbled. No, Rebecca wouldn't. She's not like this. There has to be an explanation. I kept searching. Behind the donor profiles was a spreadsheet titled Distribution Schedule. It showed a 3-way split of the foundation's money: 45% to Victoria, 40% to someone listed as RM, and 15% to MH. RM, Rebecca Morrison, her maiden name, the one she still used professionally. MH, Sydney was involved after all. But if he was taking 15%, why had he called me this morning to expose the fraud? Why risk his own scheme? Unless this spreadsheet was fake too. Unless someone was setting up multiple people to take the fall. Thomas sank into Rebecca's desk chair, his head in his hands. "I can't believe this. We've been married for 6 years. How could I not know?" "Because she didn't want you to know," I said, still rifling through papers. "Thomas, when did Rebecca and Victoria become close? You said she did the website, but was there a friendship before that?" "They met about 4 years ago at some charity networking event. Victoria needed a website designer. Rebecca needed clients. They just clicked." He looked up at me with haunted eyes. Or at least that's what Rebecca told me. 4 years ago. 1 year before the foundation was established. Had they been planning this from the beginning? I found another folder, this one unmarked. Inside were bank statements, not for the foundation, but for an account at a small credit union in Gresham. The account holder was listed as R&V Holdings LLC, R&V, Rebecca, and Victoria. The statements showed regular deposits matching the foundation's timeline, but the amounts were larger than what I'd seen in Sydney's documents. Much larger. If Victoria had taken 75% of roughly $850,000, that would be around $630,000. But this account showed deposits totaling $1.2 million over 3 years. "There's more money," I said aloud. "More than what Sydney showed me." Thomas came to look. "I don't understand. Where's the extra money coming from?" That's when I saw it, buried in the transaction details. Regular transfers from Portland Senior Services Foundation, Oregon Education Alliance, and half a dozen other organizations I'd never heard of. Rebecca and Victoria hadn't just defrauded one charity. They'd created multiple fake nonprofits, all funneling money into this single account, and every one of those organizations had websites designed by Rebecca Morrison. The front door opened. Thomas and I froze, staring at each other in horror. Copper's nails clicked on the hardwood floor as he ran to greet whoever had entered. "Tommy? Are you home?" Rebecca's voice, bright and cheerful. "Your car's in the driveway." Thomas's face went gray. I quickly shoved the documents back into the folder, but there was no time to return it to the filing cabinet. I tucked it under my arm. "Office?" Thomas called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm just getting something for Mom." Footsteps approached. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering when she saw both of us. She was petite and pretty, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that I'd always thought were intelligent. Now I wondered what else they were. "Helen," she said, surprise in her voice. "I didn't know you were coming over." Is everything okay? We need to talk, I said, keeping my voice level. About Victoria's foundation. Something flickered across Rebecca's face, too quick to identify, but it was there. The foundation? What about it? We know about the fraud, Thomas said, his voice hollow. We know you and Victoria have been stealing from donors. We found your files. Rebecca's eyes dropped to the folder under my arm. For a moment, nobody moved. Then she stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind her. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. You really shouldn't have done that. The cheerful mask was gone. The woman looking at us now was cold, calculating, and completely unafraid. You're going to give me that folder, Rebecca continued, holding out her hand. And then you're going to forget everything you saw. Both of you. Or what? I asked, my heart pounding. Rebecca smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Or I'll make sure the police know that Helen Maloney has been the mastermind behind this entire operation. I have documents with your signature, Helen. Emails from your account authorizing transfers. Text messages discussing how to hide the money. She looked at Thomas. And I have proof that you helped set up the shell company accounts, Tommy. Banking records with your name on them. That's not possible, Thomas whispered. I never. Identity theft is surprisingly easy when you have access to someone's personal information, Rebecca said. Social security numbers, passwords, signature samples. You'd be amazed what I can do with the right software. I understood then. She'd been setting us up from the beginning, creating a trail that would lead investigators to everyone but her. Victoria was the public face of the scam. Sydney was the accountant who'd signed off on the transfers. I was the wealthy donor who'd benefited financially. Thomas was the tech-savvy son who'd helped hide the money. And Rebecca? She was just the innocent website designer who'd been fooled along with everyone else. You won't get away with this, I said. I already have, Rebecca replied. Victoria thinks Sydney is her partner. Sydney thinks Victoria is working alone. The police think you're involved. Everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else. And I'm invisible. She stepped closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me that folder. You're going to go home. And you're going to wait for the police to arrest Victoria, at which point she'll probably try to drag you down with her. Then Sydney will be arrested for his signatures on those transfers. Then maybe you, Helen, if Victoria is convincing enough. And what about Thomas? I asked. You'd let your own husband go to prison? Rebecca glanced at Thomas with something that might have been regret, but it passed quickly. Tommy's a loose end I haven't decided about yet. If he keeps quiet, he might be fine. If he doesn't, she shrugged. Thomas stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Who are you? Someone who's tired of scraping by, Rebecca said. Someone who's smart enough to take what she deserves from people who have too much. She looked at me. The folder. Now. I tightened my grip on it. No. Rebecca's expression hardened. She pulled out her phone. One call, and I send the fabricated evidence to the police. One call, and your family is destroyed. Is that really what you want? My mind raced. I needed time. Time to expose Rebecca's lies. Time to prove our innocence. Time to save Victoria from her own stupidity and Sydney from being framed. But standing here in this office, facing down my daughter-in-law's cold calculation, I realized something important. Rebecca had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. At 63, I'd buried a husband, raised 2 children, run a household, and navigated decades of complex social and business situations. I'd learned patience. I'd learned how to watch, how to wait, and how to strike when the moment was right. Okay, I said, extending the folder. You win. Rebecca took it, relief and triumph mixing on her face. Smart choice. I turned to leave, Thomas following numbly behind me. But as I reached the door, I paused and looked back. Rebecca? One more thing. What? When did you start recording this conversation? Her face went blank. What are you talking about? I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen showing a voice recording app that had been running since before Rebecca entered the room. About 5 minutes ago, right around the time you admitted to fraud, identity theft, and framing multiple people for crimes they didn't commit. The color drained from Rebecca's face. You're not the only one who knows how to use technology, I said quietly. And you're not the only one who's tired of people underestimating them. I walked out before she could respond, Thomas stumbling after me, and I didn't look back. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd just declared war, and Rebecca would be coming for me with everything she had. The question was whether I could expose her before she destroyed us all. I made it halfway to my car before Rebecca came after us. "You stupid woman!" she screamed from the doorway. "You have no idea what you've just done." Thomas grabbed my arm, pulling me faster. "Mom, get in the car, now." We scrambled into my sedan, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. Rebecca was running down the driveway, her phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with rage. "Drive!" Thomas shouted. I peeled out of the driveway, my tires squealing on the wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw Rebecca standing in the middle of the street, still on her phone, watching us disappear around the corner. "She's calling someone," Thomas said, his voice tight. "Mom, we need to go to the police, right now, with that recording." "No," I said, my mind racing. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet? She just confessed to everything. We have proof." "We have proof that she admits to framing people, yes. But we don't have proof that the documents she claims to have are actually fabricated. For all we know, she really does have forged signatures and emails that look legitimate." I turned onto the main road, heading back toward my house. If we go to the police now, it becomes our word against hers, and she's had 3 years to build her case. We need more. More what? Evidence that contradicts her narrative. The original documents before she altered them. Proof of how she fabricated the evidence. Something that shows she's lying. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "And we need to talk to Victoria." Thomas went pale. "Victoria's in on this, Mom. She and Rebecca are partners." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe Victoria is being played too." We drove in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said quietly, "I need to call her, Rebecca. I don't know what I need to do. You need to stay calm and stay with me," I said firmly. "Rebecca is dangerous, Thomas. She's not the woman you married, or maybe she never was that woman. Either way, we can't trust her." My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on speaker. "Mrs. Maloney, this is Detective Ramos again. We need you to come in immediately. We've received new information about your involvement in the Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund fraud, and we have questions that need answers today." "What kind of information?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been sent emails from your account discussing money laundering and kickback arrangements with your daughter. We have bank records showing transfers into accounts under your name. And we have a witness who claims you threatened them if they exposed the fraud." Detective Ramos paused. "If you don't come in voluntarily within the next 2 hours, I'm issuing a warrant for your arrest." The line went dead. Thomas stared at the phone. "Rebecca works fast." "Us? She's been planning this for years," I said. "She probably had this ready to go the moment anyone got suspicious." I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. 2 hours. We have 2 hours to figure this out. Inside, I paced my living room while Thomas sat on the couch, his head in his hands. I pulled out my phone and stared at the recording app. 5 minutes of Rebecca's confession. But was it enough? "Call Victoria," I said suddenly. "Right now. Don't tell her about Rebecca. Just say we need to talk about the foundation. Say it's urgent." Thomas looked up. "Mom, I don't think—" "Do it." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed. It rang 4 times before Victoria answered. "Hey, Tommy. What's up?" "Vic, I need you to come to Mom's house. Right now. It's about your foundation." There was a pause. "What about it?" "Just come, please. It's important." Another pause. Longer this time. "Does this have anything to do with Sidney Hendry calling me this morning, saying he needed to talk to me about some accounting irregularities?" My stomach dropped. Sidney had called Victoria too. Why? To warn her? To try to get his own story straight? "Yes," Thomas said. "It has everything to do with that. Mom's here, and we need to talk to you. All of us." "I'm on my way," Victoria said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, my daughter arrived. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, dressed in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. She hugged me at the door, and I felt her trembling. "Mom, I'm so scared," she whispered. "Sydney said something about the IRS and investigations, and I don't understand what's happening." We sat in the living room, the three of us, what was left of my small family. I thought about Robert, gone 5 years now, and wondered what he would do in this situation. He'd always been the calm one, the problem solver. I missed him with an ache that never quite went away. "Victoria," I said gently, "I need you to tell me the truth about your foundation. All of it." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean?" I pulled out the copies of the bank statements Sydney had given me and laid them on the coffee table. 75% of your donations have been transferred to your personal accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over 3 years. That's fraud, sweetheart. That's a federal crime. Victoria stared at the papers, her face draining of color. No, that's not. Those transfers were for operational expenses. Rebecca set up those accounts to manage the website hosting and marketing costs and event planning, and Rebecca set up the accounts? I interrupted. Yes, she handles all the technical stuff. The banking, the website, the donor database. I'm just the face of the foundation, the one who talks to people and organizes events. Victoria looked between Thomas and me, panic rising in her voice. I don't understand financial stuff. Rebecca said these transfers were normal, that all nonprofits do it this way, that it was more efficient than writing individual checks for every expense. Thomas and I exchanged a glance. "Vic," he said carefully, "how much access does Rebecca have to your accounts?" "All of it. She's my business manager. She has all my passwords, my bank information, my email access. She said it was easier that way, so she could handle things while I focused on fundraising." Victoria's voice was rising. "Why are you asking me this? What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Rebecca has been stealing from your foundation, framing you for fraud, and setting up multiple people, including me, you, and Thomas, to take the fall when it all comes crashing down." Victoria laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "That's insane. Rebecca's my best friend. She would never." "Listen to this," I said, and played the recording. We sat in silence as Rebecca's voice filled the room, cold and calculating, admitting to fraud, identity theft, and framing multiple people. Admitting that Victoria thought Sydney was her partner when he wasn't. Admitting that she'd fabricated evidence against all of us. When it finished, Victoria was crying. "I don't understand. Why would she do this? I trusted her. She was like a sister to me." "Because you were a perfect patsy," I said, not unkindly. "Young, ambitious, focused on your career instead of the details. You let her handle everything because you trusted her, and she used that trust to build an empire of fraud with you as the face of it." "But the students," Victoria sobbed. "The scholarships we gave out, those were real. I met those kids. I saw them get accepted to college. Those scholarships came from legitimate grant money and the small percentage of donations Rebecca actually let through," I explained. "She needed some of it to be real to maintain the illusion. But the rest? She and her network have been pocketing it." "Her network?" Thomas asked sharply. I'd been thinking about that. Rebecca couldn't do this alone. She needed help. Someone to create the fake documents. Maybe someone with access to financial systems. Maybe even someone inside the organizations she was defrauding. The doorbell rang. We all froze. Through the front window, I could see an unmarked sedan in my driveway. Detective Ramos probably come to arrest me. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the detective standing there. It was Sidney Hendry, and he looked terrified. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please let me in. I need to explain before it's too late." I stood aside, and he rushed in, closing the door quickly behind him. He saw Victoria and Thomas in the living room, and his shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank heaven you're all here," he said. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" I asked. "Sydney, you need to start talking. Right now." He sat down heavily, pulling off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. The same gesture I'd seen this morning, which now felt like a lifetime ago. "Rebecca Morrison came to me 18 months ago. She said she was doing bookkeeping for several small nonprofits and needed an accountant to file their tax forms. Standard work. I had no reason to refuse. Go on, I said. 3 months in, I started noticing irregularities. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. I confronted her, and she said it was just poor record keeping from the nonprofits themselves, that she was cleaning it up. I believed her. He looked at Victoria. Then she told me about your foundation, said you needed help with your books, and asked if I'd take you on as a client. Since I already did your mother's taxes, I thought it would be convenient. You're saying she targeted you, Thomas said. Used you to legitimize the fraud. Yes. And once I was involved, she started forging my signature on documents. I didn't know until 2 weeks ago when I was doing the annual filing and saw signatures that weren't mine. I compared them to my records, dozens of authorizations I never made, transfers I never approved. He looked at me. That's why I called you this morning. I was trying to warn you before the whole thing exploded. I thought Victoria was the mastermind and Rebecca was just helping. I thought if I could get you involved, maybe you could talk sense into Victoria before the IRS came down on all of us. But you left me that note, I said, about checking Rebecca's accounts. Because after I called you, I dug deeper. I found the R&V Holdings account, the multiple charities, all of it. And I realized Victoria couldn't be the mastermind. She doesn't have the technical skills, but Rebecca does. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. I copied everything. All the real records, all the forged documents, all the email trails showing how Rebecca manipulated everyone. It's all here. I took the flash drive, hope blooming in my chest for the first time since this morning. This can prove we're innocent? It can prove Rebecca Morrison is running a criminal enterprise and framing half of Portland to cover her tracks, Sydney said. But we need to get this to the authorities before she does any more damage. That's when my phone rang again. Detective Ramos. I answered on speaker. Mrs. Maloney, I'm outside your house with a warrant for your arrest. Please come out with your hands visible. Through the window, I saw 3 police cars pulling up to my curb. She did it, Thomas whispered. Rebecca actually did it. Sydney stood up, gripping the flash drive. I'll talk to them. I'll explain. No, I said, an idea forming. Sydney, how good are you with computers? I'm an accountant. Decent, I suppose. Why? Because Rebecca has been fabricating evidence using digital forgeries. Can you tell the difference between a real document and a forged one? If I have the original files and metadata, yes. Why? Because we're going to prove Rebecca is a liar, but we need to do it carefully. If we just hand over that flash drive, she'll claim it's been tampered with, that we fabricated it to frame her. I looked at my children, at Sydney, and made a decision. I'm going to go out there and cooperate with the police. I'm going to let them arrest me. Mom, no, Victoria cried. Listen to me. While I'm at the station, Sydney, you and Thomas are going to take that flash drive and make copies. Send them to 3 different lawyers. One for me, one for Victoria, one for yourself. Then you're going to contact the FBI because this crosses state lines if Rebecca's been running multiple fake charities. The FBI has forensic accountants who can verify the documents are real. What about Rebecca? Thomas asked. She thinks she's won. She thinks I'm about to be arrested and you're all going to fall apart. She's going to get comfortable, maybe even cocky. I moved toward the door. That's when people make mistakes. Mrs. Maloney, this is dangerous, Sydney said. If Rebecca realizes what we're doing, then we'd better work fast. The doorbell rang again, followed by a loud knock. Police! We have a warrant! I looked at my children one last time. Victoria, whose ambition had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Thomas, whose love had blinded him to his wife's true nature. Both of them looking at me with fear and trust in equal measure. Your father used to say that the best defense is patience and preparation, I told them. Rebecca has been preparing for 3 years, but she forgot one thing. I've been preparing my whole life to protect this family. I opened the door. Detective Ramos stood there with 2 uniformed officers, warrant in hand. Helen Maloney, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering, she said, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed my hands behind my back and led me to the police car, I saw my neighbors watching from their windows. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen in her garden, hand over her mouth in shock. The mailman had stopped mid-delivery to stare, but I held my head high, because I knew something Rebecca didn't. I'd raised two smart, capable children who knew right from wrong. I had an accountant who was tired of being used as a pawn, and I had 5 minutes of recorded confession that proved exactly who the real criminal was. Most importantly, I had something Rebecca would never have: a family that, despite everything, would fight for each other. As the police car pulled away from my house, I looked back to see Thomas and Sydney already heading to Thomas's car. The flash drive clutched in Sydney's hand. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. And this time, Rebecca Morrison was playing against someone who'd had 63 years to learn how to win. The interrogation room at the Portland Police Bureau was exactly what you'd expect. Gray walls, metal table, fluorescent lights that hummed incessantly. Detective Margie Ramos sat across from me, a folder thick with what I assumed was fabricated evidence spread between us. I'd been here for 3 hours. They'd processed me, fingerprinted me, taken my photo like a common criminal. The whole time, I kept my expression calm, almost serene. It clearly frustrated Detective Ramos. "Mrs. Maloney, we have emails from your account discussing kickback arrangements with your daughter Victoria," she said for the 3rd time, sliding printouts across the table. "We have bank statements showing transfers of stolen money into accounts under your name. We have testimony from a witness who says you've been involved in this fraud from the beginning." I looked at the emails without touching them. They were good forgeries. I'd give Rebecca that much. They had my email address, my writing style, even referenced specific family details that made them seem authentic. "Those aren't real," I said calmly. "They came from your email server, Mrs. Maloney. Then someone accessed my account and sent them. Have you checked the IP addresses? The metadata?" Detective Ramos's jaw tightened. "We're conducting a full forensic analysis." "Good. Because you'll find those emails were sent from locations I've never been, at times when I can prove I was somewhere else." I folded my hands on the table. "Detective, I'm a 63-year-old widow who donated to what I thought was a legitimate charity. I was deceived, just like dozens of other donors. The person you should be investigating is Rebecca Morrison." "Your daughter-in-law?" Detective Ramos raised an eyebrow. "The witness who came forward with this evidence?" My heart sank. So Rebecca had officially positioned herself as the whistleblower. Clever. "Let me guess," I said. "Rebecca told you she discovered the fraud and felt obligated to report it, even though it meant implicating her own family." "Something like that. And I'm sure she seemed very credible, very concerned, maybe even emotional about betraying people she loved." I leaned forward slightly. "Detective Ramos, Rebecca Morrison is the architect of this entire scheme. She's been running multiple fraudulent charities for at least 3 years, using my daughter as a front, forging documents, stealing identities, and setting up anyone who might expose her. That's a serious accusation. I have proof. A recording of her admitting to fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." I reached for my phone, then remembered they'd taken it. "It's on my phone, in the voice recording app." Detective Ramos made a note. "We'll examine it. But Mrs. Maloney, even if this recording exists, Rebecca Morrison has already provided us with explanations for her involvement. She claims she was hired by your daughter to manage the foundation's technical infrastructure, and that she only recently discovered the fraud when she was reviewing files for tax purposes. That's a lie. Can you prove it? My accountant, Sydney Hendry, has evidence. Financial records, forged signatures, email trails showing how Rebecca manipulated everyone involved." I kept my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "He has everything on a flash drive. We've spoken to Mr. Hendry. He came in an hour ago." Detective Ramos consulted her notes. "He claims to have evidence, yes, but he also has his own signatures on dozens of fraudulent transfer authorizations. Right now, Mr. Hendry appears to be either a co-conspirator or severely negligent in his duties as an accountant. His signatures were forged. So he says. Our forensic team is analyzing them now." She closed her folder. "Mrs. Maloney, here's the situation. We have evidence suggesting you, your daughter Victoria, and your accountant Sydney Hendry have been running an elaborate charity fraud for 3 years. The only person who seems to be innocent in all this is Rebecca Morrison, who had the courage to come forward despite the personal cost. She's playing you, I said flatly. She's a con artist and a good one. That's why her story sounds believable. Or maybe your story sounds unbelievable because it is. Detective Ramos stood. I'm going to recommend the district attorney file formal charges against you, your daughter, and Mr. Hendry. In the meantime, you'll be held pending bail review. Wait, I said as she moved toward the door. Did you at least listen to the recording on my phone? She paused. We attempted to access your phone. The recording app shows no saved files. My blood went cold. That's impossible. I recorded. The app was empty, Mrs. Maloney. Whatever you think you recorded, it's not there. She left, and I sat alone in that cold room, my mind racing. The recording was gone. Rebecca must have remotely accessed my phone somehow, deleted the file. She'd probably been monitoring my phone since this morning, maybe even before. How deep did her preparation go? What else had she anticipated? The door opened again, and a young officer stepped in. Mrs. Maloney, you have a visitor. Your lawyer is here. I frowned. I haven't called a lawyer yet. She says you have a standing arrangement with her firm. He checked his notes. Andrea Castellano from Castellano and Partners? I didn't know any Andrea Castellano, but I nodded anyway, curious who had sent her. The woman who entered the interrogation room 5 minutes later was in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She had sharp eyes and moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. Mrs. Maloney, she said, sitting down across from me and pulling out a legal pad. My name is Andrea Castellano. Your son Thomas contacted my firm this afternoon and retained me on your behalf. Before we discuss your case, I need you to know that this room may be monitored, so be careful what you say. She wrote something on her legal pad and slid it across the table. Flash drive is secure. FBI contacted. Thomas and Sydney safe. Rebecca doesn't know yet. Relief flooded through me. I wrote back. She deleted my recording. Andrea read it and nodded, writing again. We anticipated that. Sydney made backup copies before you were arrested. We have the original file with metadata proving when it was recorded. Now then, Andrea said aloud, pulling the legal pad back. Let's discuss the charges against you. The district attorney is preparing to file multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. These are serious federal charges that carry significant prison time if convicted. I'm innocent, I said firmly. I believe you, but belief isn't enough. We need to build a defense, and that means understanding everything about this case. She pulled out documents from her briefcase. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. The emails, the bank statements, the witness testimony from Rebecca Morrison. I have to tell you, Mrs. Maloney, it looks bad. Because Rebecca is good at her job. Yes, she's constructed a narrative where she's the innocent bystander who discovered fraud and reported it. She's positioned herself as credible, sympathetic, and cooperative. Meanwhile, you, your daughter, and your accountant all look like co-conspirators pointing fingers at each other to avoid responsibility. So, what do? Andrea leaned forward slightly. We prove Rebecca Morrison is a professional con artist with a history of fraud. We establish pattern and precedent. And we demonstrate that the evidence against you has been digitally manipulated. She paused. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? Rebecca filed for a restraining order against you 2 hours ago. She claims you've been harassing her, that you broke into her home this morning and stole confidential documents, and that you threatened her when she tried to report the fraud. A judge granted a temporary order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of her, and you're not allowed to contact her directly or indirectly. I felt like I'd been punched. That's absurd. Thomas and I went to his own house, a house she shares as his legal wife, which gives her equal property rights. Legally, you did enter without her permission while she wasn't present. Andrea held up a hand. I know the context. I know you were investigating, but Rebecca has twisted it into evidence of harassment and witness intimidation. She's neutralizing me, I said, understanding dawning. The restraining order means I can't confront her, can't investigate her, can't get anywhere near her. Exactly. And it makes you look guilty, like you're targeting an innocent witness who exposed your crimes. Andrea wrote something else on her pad. But the restraining order works both ways. She can't come near you either. We can use that. What about Victoria? I asked. Has Rebecca gotten to her? Andrea's expression grew grim. Your daughter was brought in for questioning 3 hours ago. She's in another interrogation room right now. According to my colleague who's representing her, Victoria is not handling this well. What does that mean? It means she's scared, confused, and starting to panic. The detective interviewing her is very good at her job, and Victoria is beginning to consider taking a plea deal. A plea deal? For crimes she didn't commit? For crimes she can't prove she didn't commit. The evidence against her is overwhelming, Mrs. Maloney. Her name is on everything. Her signatures, her accounts, her foundation. Rebecca made sure of that. Andrea leaned back. If Victoria takes a deal and testifies against you and Sydney, claiming you were the masterminds and she was just a naive participant, the prosecution's case becomes nearly airtight. I closed my eyes, trying to think through the implications. Rebecca had orchestrated this perfectly. Victoria would panic and turn on us to save herself. I'd be seen as the manipulative mother who used her own daughter for fraud. Sydney would be the corrupt accountant who enabled it all. And Rebecca would walk away free, probably with most of the money safely hidden in offshore accounts. We need to talk to Victoria, I said. Before she makes a mistake she can't undo. I'll arrange it, but Mrs. Maloney, there's something else you need to know. Andrea's voice dropped lower. Rebecca Morrison isn't working alone. We've been doing background research, and we found connections between her and at least 3 other people involved in similar charity fraud schemes across the Pacific Northwest. A network, I breathed. She mentioned that on the recording. Yes, and one of those people is someone you know. Andrea pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. I stared at the photo, my mouth going dry. It was a surveillance image from what looked like a coffee shop, showing Rebecca sitting across from someone, papers spread between them. The other person in the photo was Detective Margie Ramos. That was taken 6 weeks ago, Andrea said quietly. Around the time Detective Ramos claims her investigation into the Pacific Northwest Children's Education Fund began. She's corrupt, I whispered. The detective investigating us is working with Rebecca. We don't have proof of that yet. This photo shows a meeting, nothing more. They could have a legitimate connection. Maybe Detective Ramos was conducting preliminary interviews. But Andrea's tone suggested she didn't believe that. What we do know is that Detective Ramos has been pushing this investigation in a very specific direction, and that direction benefits Rebecca Morrison. The door opened abruptly. A different officer stepped in. Mrs. Maloney, we're moving you to a holding cell. Your bail hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Andrea stood. I'll be there. In the meantime, say nothing to anyone about this case. Don't talk to other inmates, don't talk to guards, don't talk to detectives. Understand? I nodded, and they led me away. The holding cell was small and cold, with a metal bench and a thin mattress. I sat there as evening turned to night, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. This morning, I'd been a respectable widow whose biggest worry was whether to replant the roses in my garden. Now I was a suspected felon facing federal charges, sitting in a jail cell while my family fell apart. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. Around midnight, a guard came to the cell. Maloney, you have a phone call. I followed her to a phone on the wall in a small alcove. You have 5 minutes, she said, and stepped back to give me minimal privacy. I picked up the receiver. Hello? Hello, Helen. Rebecca's voice, smooth and cold. I thought we should talk. My grip tightened on the phone. The restraining order says you can't contact me. It says nothing about me contacting you. And this call isn't being recorded because I'm using a burner phone and calling the jail's general line. No one will ever know we talked. What do you want? I want you to understand something. You think you're clever, getting that recording, sending Thomas and Sydney off with evidence, hiring a lawyer. You think you're going to expose me and save your family. She laughed softly. You're not. Do you know why? I said nothing. Because I've been planning this for 4 years, Helen. 4 years. I've anticipated every move, prepared for every contingency. That recording you made? I knew you'd try something like that, so I had remote access to your phone ready to go. The flash drive Sydney has. Half of those files are corrupted or incomplete, and the ones that aren't can be explained away as his attempt to cover his own involvement. Your lawyer? She's good, but she's outmatched. You can't win this, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I already have. Tomorrow morning, Victoria is going to take a plea deal. She's going to testify that you and Sydney masterminded the fraud, and she was too naive to understand what was happening. The prosecutor has already drafted the agreement. Rebecca's voice hardened. And then you're going to plead guilty too. Never. Oh, you will. Because if you don't, I'm going to destroy Thomas. I have evidence, real evidence, not forgeries, that will put him in prison for 20 years. Documents he actually did sign, accounts he actually did help me open back when we were first married, and I told him it was for estate planning. I've been building an insurance policy against my husband for 6 years, Helen. If you fight this, if you don't take a deal, I will burn Thomas's life to the ground. My heart hammered in my chest. You're bluffing. Am I? Tomorrow morning, ask your lawyer to check the federal court filings. You'll find a sealed indictment against Thomas Joseph Maloney for wire fraud and conspiracy. It's already been filed. All I have to do is give the word, and it gets unsealed. Your son goes to prison, loses his engineering license, loses everything, unless you cooperate. What do you want? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Plead guilty. Serve your time. Let Victoria serve hers. In 5 to 7 years, you'll both be released, and this will be over. You'll still have some life left to live. But if you fight me, I'll make sure you die in prison and your children's lives are destroyed. All of you. Victoria, Thomas, and their futures. Gone. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Why us? Because you have everything I never did. Respect, stability, a family that actually cares about you. I grew up with nothing, Helen. Foster homes, abuse, poverty. I clawed my way up from nothing, and people like you, people who've had easy lives, you look down on people like me without even realizing it. Her voice was bitter. So yes, I took your money. I used your daughter. I fooled your son. And I'm going to watch your family crumble because you deserve it. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the wall. The guard came over. Time's up, Maloney. Back in the cell, I lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Rebecca had thought of everything. She'd built her trap so carefully, so thoroughly, that every path led to destruction. But as I lay there in the darkness, I realized something. Rebecca had made one mistake, one critical error in her perfect plan. She'd underestimated how far a mother would go to protect her children, and she'd forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. Tomorrow morning, I would make my choice. But it wouldn't be the choice Rebecca expected. It would be the choice she feared. The bail hearing started at 9 the next morning. Andrea Castellano met me in the courthouse hallway, her expression tense but controlled. I checked the federal filings like you asked, she said quietly. There is a sealed indictment against Thomas. Rebecca wasn't bluffing about that. I know, I said. But she made a mistake telling me about it. Andrea frowned. How is that a mistake? She's using it as leverage. Exactly. She revealed her trump card before she needed to. That means she's worried. I straightened my shoulders. Is everything I asked for in place? Yes, but Helen, I have to advise you that what you're planning is extremely risky. If this goes wrong, it won't. Is Victoria here? In the courtroom. She looks terrible. Andrea hesitated. Her lawyer says she's 10 minutes away from signing the plea agreement. We need to move fast. The courtroom was small, used for bail hearings and minor proceedings. Victoria sat in the front row with her attorney, her eyes red and puffy. Sydney was there too, looking drawn and exhausted. Thomas sat behind them, his face a mask of controlled anguish. And in the back corner, trying to look invisible, sat Rebecca Morrison. She wore a modest dress and minimal makeup, playing the part of the reluctant witness perfectly. When our eyes met, she smiled. Just a tiny curve of her lips that said, "You've already lost." Judge Patricia Winters entered, and we all stood. She was in her 60s, with silver hair and a reputation for being sharp and fair. I'd done my research on her last night, using my one allowed phone call not to call Thomas, but to call an old friend who worked in the court system. This is a bail hearing for Helen Maloney, charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering, Judge Winters said, settling into her seat. Ms. Castellano, you're representing Mrs. Maloney? I am, Your Honor. And the prosecution is requesting Mrs. Maloney be held without bail? The assistant district attorney, a young man named Elmer Park, stood. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Maloney is a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. She's already violated a restraining order. That's a lie, I said, standing up. Judge Winters looked at me sharply. Mrs. Maloney, you'll have a chance to speak. Sit down. Andrea pulled me back to my seat, whispering urgently, let me handle this. But I'd spent all night in that cell thinking, planning, and I knew this was the moment. Everything hinged on the next few minutes. Your Honor, Andrea said, Mrs. Maloney has not violated any restraining order. The order was filed yesterday afternoon, and Mrs. Maloney has been in police custody since before it was issued. As for being a flight risk, Mrs. Maloney is a 63-year-old widow with deep roots in this community. She has no criminal record, no passport, and no intention of fleeing. The prosecution has evidence suggesting Mrs. Maloney has been orchestrating a complex fraud for 3 years, Elmer Park countered. That level of sophistication and premeditation indicates someone capable of planning an escape. Mrs. Maloney isn't the sophisticated criminal here, Andrea said. If I may, Your Honor, there are significant irregularities in this case that suggest the real perpetrator is still at large. Judge Winters leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? May I approach with evidence, Your Honor? The judge nodded, and Andrea brought forward a laptop. Your Honor, we have digital forensic evidence showing that the emails allegedly sent from Mrs. Maloney's account were actually sent from IP addresses in different states, addresses that match locations where Rebecca Morrison, the prosecution's key witness, was traveling at the time. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. We also have evidence, Andrea continued, that the bank accounts allegedly controlled by Mrs. Maloney were actually opened using forged identity documents, and that the real account controller was someone with extensive computer expertise Mrs. Maloney does not possess. This is speculation, Elmer Park objected. The forensic analysis isn't complete. It is now, Andrea said calmly. The FBI's Cybercrime Division finished their analysis at 6 this morning. They've confirmed that multiple documents in this case are sophisticated forgeries, and they've traced the creation of these forgeries to a single source. She pulled out a folder. I have their preliminary report here, Your Honor. Judge Winters took the report and read silently for several minutes. I watched Rebecca out of the corner of my eye. She was texting someone, her fingers moving quickly across her phone screen. Probably Detective Ramos, I thought, trying to figure out how to contain this. This is concerning, Judge Winters said finally. Mr. Park, was the prosecution aware that the FBI was conducting a parallel investigation? Elmer Park looked genuinely confused. No, Your Honor. This is the first I'm hearing of it. That's because the FBI investigation wasn't into Mrs. Maloney, Andrea said. It was into a pattern of charity fraud across 4 states. Mrs. Maloney's case just happens to fit that pattern. She paused. And the person at the center of that pattern is Rebecca Morrison. Rebecca stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I'm the one who reported the fraud. I'm the victim here. Mrs. Morrison, sit down, Judge Winters said sharply. Your Honor, if I may, I said, standing again. I have something to say. Judge Winters looked at me for a long moment. Go ahead, Mrs. Maloney. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for since Rebecca's phone call last night. The moment when I'd either save my family or destroy us all. Your Honor, I need to confess something, I said. I haven't been entirely honest about my involvement in this case. Andrea's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with alarm. Thomas made a strangled sound from the gallery. Victoria was staring at me with betrayal written across her face. But I continued. When Sydney Hendry first called me yesterday morning to tell me about the fraud, I didn't just passively receive that information. I immediately began my own investigation. I went to my daughter-in-law's house without her knowledge. I searched through her private files. I took documents that didn't belong to me. Rebecca's expression shifted from alarm to triumph. She thought I was about to take the fall, just as she'd demanded. And while I was there, I continued, I found something interesting. I found evidence that Rebecca Morrison has been running fraudulent charities for at least 7 years, not 3. I found connections to other people in other states. I found a network. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Not the one Sydney had, but a different one. And I copied all of it onto this drive. Your Honor, this is illegal search and seizure. Rebecca's lawyer stood up, finally earning his fee. Anything on that drive is inadmissible. Except that I didn't just take documents, I said calmly. I also installed something on Rebecca's computer while I was in her office. A small program that my late husband, who was a software engineer, designed years ago for tracking stolen laptops. It runs in the background, invisible, and it records everything, every keystroke, every file access, every email sent and received. The courtroom went completely silent. For the past 24 hours, I continued, that program has been recording everything Rebecca Morrison has done on her computer. Every forged document she's created, every communication with her co-conspirators, every attempt to manipulate evidence and witnesses. I held up the flash drive. It's all here, Your Honor. Time-stamped, verified, and completely legal because I installed it on my son's property with his permission. That was a slight stretch of the truth. Thomas hadn't known about the program until I'd called him at 2 a.m. But he nodded vigorously from the gallery. Rebecca's face had gone from pale to gray. You're lying. You don't have... I have video of you deleting the recording I made of our conversation, I said, turning to face her directly. I have logs of you accessing Detective Margie Ramos's email account to coordinate your testimony. I have records of you creating forged documents using my daughter's information. I have everything, Rebecca, because you made one critical mistake. What mistake? She whispered. You assumed that because I'm an older woman, because I don't work in technology, because I seem simple and trusting, that I'm not capable of fighting back intelligently. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. My husband spent 30 years in software security. Do you really think he didn't teach me a few things? Do you think I haven't been watching and learning and preparing for the day someone might try to hurt my family? Judge Winters held out her hand. Ms. Castellano, I'll need to see that flash drive and verify its contents. Andrea took it from me and approached the bench. Your Honor, we also have sworn testimony from 3 other victims of Rebecca Morrison's schemes in Washington State and Idaho. They're willing to testify about similar patterns of fraud, identity theft, and witness manipulation. This is entrapment, Rebecca shouted. She can't just install spyware on someone's computer. Actually, she can, if the computer is on property belonging to her son and he gave permission, Judge Winters said, her voice ice cold. Mr. Park, I'm going to review this evidence. In the meantime, I'm releasing Mrs. Maloney on her own recognizance. Your Honor, Elmer Park started. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering Rebecca Morrison to surrender her passport and remain in Portland pending investigation into these new allegations. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Morrison to a holding room. Rebecca's carefully constructed mask finally shattered completely. No, you can't do this. I'm the victim. They're framing me. But the bailiff was already moving toward her. Rebecca looked wildly around the courtroom, her eyes landing on Detective Ramos, who had quietly stood and was edging toward the exit. Margie, do something! Rebecca screamed. You promised! Detective Ramos froze. Judge Winters' eyes narrowed. Detective Ramos, please remain in the courtroom, the judge said. I have some questions for you about your investigation into this matter. Everything happened quickly after that. Rebecca was escorted out, still shouting denials and threats. Detective Ramos was asked to explain her relationship with Rebecca Morrison. Elmer Park, looking stunned, requested an emergency meeting with his superiors, and I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling 63 years of life experience settle into place like armor. Victoria approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I was going to take the plea deal. I was going to testify against you." "I know, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But you didn't. That's what matters." Thomas hugged me from the other side, and I felt him shaking. "Mom, when did you install that program on Rebecca's computer?" "I didn't," I admitted quietly. "I was bluffing. The flash drive has the documents I took from her office, but there's no spyware, no recordings of the past 24 hours. Thomas pulled back, staring at me. "You were bluffing, but you sounded so certain." "Because I knew Rebecca would react exactly the way she did. Guilty people always reveal themselves when they panic." I looked at Andrea, who was trying very hard not to smile. "The FBI investigation is real, though. I spent my phone call last night contacting a friend whose son works in the Portland field office. I told him everything I knew, and he agreed to fast-track the forensic analysis. The forgeries are real. The pattern across multiple states is real. I just needed Rebecca to think I had more evidence than I actually did, so she'd expose herself." Sydney joined us, looking dazed. "Helen, you orchestrated this entire thing. You let yourself be arrested, knowing that Rebecca would get overconfident and make mistakes." "Rebecca spent years planning her crime," I said. "But she planned for young, inexperienced opponents. She planned for people who would panic or fold under pressure. She didn't plan for someone who's lived long enough to understand patience, strategy, and how to use an opponent's arrogance against them." "What about Thomas's indictment?" Victoria asked. Rebecca said, "The indictment is real," Andrea interjected. "But it's also based entirely on forged evidence. With the FBI's findings and Rebecca's behavior today, that indictment will be dismissed within 48 hours. A court clerk approached. "Ms. Castellano, Judge Winters would like to see you and Mrs. Maloney in her chambers." We followed her to a small office behind the courtroom. Judge Winters sat behind her desk, the flash drive connected to her computer, documents spread before her. "Mrs. Maloney," she said, "what you did was extraordinarily risky. If Rebecca Morrison hadn't reacted the way she did, if Detective Ramos hadn't been there to implicate herself, your bluff could have backfired spectacularly." "I know, Your Honor," I said, "but I also knew my daughter-in-law. I knew she couldn't resist gloating when she thought she'd won, and I knew that when confronted with evidence she believed could destroy her, she'd panic and reveal her true nature." Judge Winters studied me for a long moment. "You remind me of my mother. She was a quiet woman, unassuming, the kind of person people overlooked, but she was the strongest person I ever knew." She handed the flash drive back to Andrea. "The documents on here, combined with the FBI's forensic analysis and the testimony from other victims, should be sufficient to build a case against Rebecca Morrison and her co-conspirators. All charges against you will be dropped." "And Victoria? And Sydney?" "The evidence suggests your daughter was manipulated and your accountant was used. I expect those charges will be dropped as well, though they'll need to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. "Mrs. Maloney," Judge Winters added, "I strongly advise you to let law enforcement handle this from here forward. No more investigations, no more confrontations, no more risks." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, but we both knew that I'd do whatever was necessary to protect my family, regardless of the risk, because that's what mothers do. We prepare, we plan, we wait for the right moment, and then we act with a decisiveness that comes from knowing exactly what we're fighting for. Rebecca Morrison had built an empire of lies using other people's trust and greed, but I'd built something stronger, a family that, despite everything, still stood together, and in the end, that made all the difference. 3 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee, watching the rain fall on my garden just as I had the morning this all began. But everything was different now. The charges against me, Victoria, and Sydney had been formally dropped. The FBI's investigation into Rebecca Morrison and her network had uncovered fraud spanning 7 states and 14 fake charities, with total losses exceeding $4 million. Rebecca was being held without bail, facing federal charges that would likely keep her in prison for 20 to 30 years. Detective Margie Ramos had been suspended pending her own investigation for corruption and obstruction of justice. The local news had covered it extensively. "Elaborate charity fraud ring exposed," read the headlines. My neighbors looked at me differently now, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed curiosity about what it had been like to nearly go to prison for crimes I didn't commit. Mrs. Patterson had brought over a casserole yesterday, patting my hand and saying, "I never believed those awful things they said about you, Helen. Not for a moment. But I'd seen her watching through her curtains during my arrest, and I knew that wasn't entirely true. Still, I accepted the casserole with grace. That's what you do when you're 63 and you understand that people are complicated, contradictory, and often doing their best with limited information." The doorbell rang. I knew who it would be. Victoria had called this morning asking if she could come over to talk. Really talk, she'd said. Not just the surface conversations we'd been having since the court hearing. I opened the door to find my daughter standing there with 2 grocery bags. "I brought lunch," she said. "And I thought maybe we could cook together, like we used to." "I'd like that," I said, stepping aside to let her in. We worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, falling into a comfortable rhythm that reminded me of when she was a teenager, before ambition and independence had pulled her in a dozen different directions. "Mom," Victoria said finally, setting down her knife, "I need to apologize to you for so many things. You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Please let me say this." She turned to face me, tears already forming in her eyes. I was so obsessed with building something impressive, with making a name for myself, that I stopped paying attention to the details. I let Rebecca handle everything because it was easier than learning how to do it myself. I trusted her because trusting was simpler than verifying. "You were deceived by a professional con artist," I said gently. "That's not a moral failing, Victoria." "But it is, Mom. It's arrogance. I thought I was too smart to be fooled, too savvy to be manipulated. And that arrogance made me vulnerable." She wiped her eyes. "And then, when everything fell apart, I almost betrayed you. I was going to take that plea deal. I was going to testify that you and Sydney were the masterminds because I was scared, and I wanted to save myself. But you didn't," I reminded her. "Only because you stopped me before I could. Only because you were smart enough and brave enough to see through Rebecca's trap." Victoria's voice cracked. "I'm 28 years old, Mom. I have 2 degrees and a successful career. And I couldn't figure out what a 63-year-old woman figured out in less than 24 hours. What does that say about me?" I set down my own knife and took her hands. "It says you're human. It says you're young and still learning. And it says that maybe, just maybe, there's value in lived experience that can't be taught in any university." I feel like such a fool. "Then be a fool who learns from her mistakes," I said. "Rebecca targeted you precisely because you're ambitious and trusting. Those aren't bad qualities, Victoria. They're good qualities that were exploited by someone with bad intentions. The lesson isn't to stop being ambitious or to stop trusting people. The lesson is to verify, to pay attention to details, and to remember that if something seems too easy, it probably is." She hugged me then, holding on tight like she used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I don't know what I would have done if you'd gone to prison because of me. You would have survived," I said simply, "and you would have fought to clear my name, just like I fought to protect you. That's what family does." We finished cooking in a more comfortable silence, and over lunch, Victoria told me about her plans. The foundation was being dissolved, of course. Its reputation was destroyed beyond repair. But several legitimate charities had reached out, interested in hiring her for fundraising work. "I told them I needed time," she said. "Time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be impressive or successful or whatever I thought I needed to be." "That sounds wise," I said. "I'm thinking about going back to school. Maybe getting a degree in nonprofit management, actually learning how to do this properly instead of just winging it." She picked at her food. "But I'm also scared. Scared that everyone will always see me as the woman who was duped by a con artist. Scared that I'll never be able to rebuild my credibility. People forget," I said. "Not completely, but enough. In a year or 2, this will be old news. And the people who matter, the ones who care about substance over scandal, will judge you by what you do next, not by what happened to you. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Thomas, and he wasn't alone. He'd brought Sydney Hendry. "Hope it's okay that I invited Sydney," Thomas said as they came in. "He wanted to talk to you, and I thought, well, we should all hear what he has to say." We settled in the living room, the four of us who'd been caught in Rebecca's web and somehow emerged on the other side. Sydney looked older than he had 3 weeks ago, the stress of the investigation having etched new lines around his eyes. "Mrs. Maloney," he began, "I owe you an apology and an explanation." "You don't owe me anything, Sydney. You were a victim, too. That's generous of you, but it's not entirely accurate." He removed his glasses and cleaned them, that familiar nervous gesture. "I was negligent. I saw warning signs with Rebecca's charities and I ignored them because the work was easy and the fees were good. I didn't dig deeper when I should have because I didn't want to lose a profitable client." "You reported it in the end," I pointed out. "Only after it became impossible to ignore. Only after my signature had been forged so many times that I was implicated in a federal crime." He put his glasses back on. "I've been an accountant for 30 years, Mrs. Maloney. I'm supposed to be the person who catches fraud, not the person who enables it through inattention. So what are you going to do about it?" I asked. He looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Guilt is useful only if it leads to change. Are you going to retire? Are you going to be more careful? Are you going to do something different?" I leaned forward. "Because beating yourself up accomplishes nothing, Sydney. Learning from this and becoming better, that accomplishes something. I'm implementing new procedures in my practice," he said slowly. "Mandatory audits of all nonprofit clients, verification of every signature, background checks on new clients, and," he hesitated, "I'm offering to help the FBI train other accountants to spot the kind of fraud Rebecca was running. Pro bono work, helping to prevent this from happening to other people." "That's good," I said. "That's taking responsibility and turning it into something positive." We talked for another hour, about the investigation, about the other victims of Rebecca's schemes, about the complicated process of untangling years of fraud. Sydney had learned that some of the charities Rebecca created had been sophisticated enough to fool major donors and grant organizations. She hadn't been a small-time con artist. She'd been remarkably talented at her chosen profession. "What I don't understand," Victoria said, "is how she kept it all straight, managing multiple fake charities, forging documents, manipulating so many people. The organizational skills required must have been incredible." "They were," Thomas said quietly. We all turned to look at him. He'd been silent for most of the conversation, and now he looked deeply uncomfortable. "I've been going through our finances, our shared documents, everything from our marriage. Rebecca had spreadsheets tracking every lie she told, every identity she created, every account she controlled. She had backup plans for her backup plans. She'd been preparing for the possibility of exposure from day one." "I'm sorry, Thomas," I said. "I know this must be devastating. I keep thinking I should have known, should have seen it." He rubbed his face. "We were married for 6 years. How could I not know who she really was?" "Because she was very good at lying," I said simply. "And because you loved her. Love makes us want to believe the best in people." "I'm getting divorced, obviously," Thomas continued. "The paperwork is already filed. But, Mom, there's something else." He pulled out a folder. Rebecca had files on all of us. Not just financial stuff, personal information. Weaknesses, fears, things she could use against us if needed. She had notes about how you were still grieving Dad, how Victoria was desperate to prove herself, how I was insecure about never living up to Dad's accomplishments. He opened the folder, and I saw pages of handwritten observations. Rebecca's neat handwriting detailing our family dynamics, our vulnerabilities, our pressure points. It was like reading a dossier prepared by an enemy spy. "She studied us," Victoria whispered, "like we were targets." "That's exactly what we were," Thomas said. "And the worst part? Some of what she wrote is true. I am insecure about not being like Dad. Victoria, you do have something to prove. Mom, you do still grieve." He looked at me. But reading this made me realize something. Rebecca saw our weaknesses, but she missed our strengths. She knew Mom was grieving, but she didn't understand that grief had made you stronger, more resilient. She knew Victoria was ambitious, but she didn't realize that ambition came from genuine desire to help people. She knew I was insecure, but she never understood that insecurity made me loyal, made me someone who values family above everything. She was intelligent but not wise, I said. There's a difference. Intelligence is about knowing facts, understanding systems, manipulating variables. Wisdom is about understanding people, recognizing what really matters, seeing the bigger picture. Rebecca had intelligence in abundance, but wisdom? She had none. Sydney nodded slowly. She thought age was a weakness, that being older meant being slow, outdated, easy to fool. She never considered that age might mean experience, patience, perspective. She underestimated you, Mrs. Maloney, Thomas said, completely and utterly, and that's why she lost. We sat in silence for a moment, and I thought about Robert. About how he used to say that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when things were easy, but what they did when everything was falling apart. We'd all been tested these past weeks, tested in ways none of us had anticipated or wanted, and we'd survived. Not perfectly, not without scars, but we'd survived. I need to tell you all something, I said. That last part in the courtroom, when I claimed to have installed spyware on Rebecca's computer, I was bluffing. There was no program, no recordings, just the documents I'd taken from her office and the FBI investigation I'd initiated. Victoria's eyes widened. You were bluffing? But you sounded so certain. Because I understood something about Rebecca that she didn't understand about herself. She was arrogant. She believed she'd thought of everything, covered every angle. So when confronted with evidence that she'd missed something major, she panicked. And in her panic, she revealed herself completely. I smiled. Sometimes the best weapon isn't actually having superior resources. It's making your opponent believe you have them. That's terrifying, Mom, Thomas said, but he was smiling. Remind me never to play poker with you. Your father always said the same thing, I replied. As the afternoon wore on and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Sydney's plans to visit his daughter in Seattle, Victoria's idea to take a cooking class, Thomas's decision to adopt a dog, I felt something settling into place. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of it. The recognition that we'd been through something terrible together and emerged changed but not broken. When they finally left, hugs exchanged and promises made to get together again soon, I stood in my doorway watching them go. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Mrs. Patterson was in her garden again, and she waved at me. I waved back. Inside, I cleared away the coffee cups and lunch dishes, restored order to my living room, and found myself standing in front of the mantel where photos of my family were displayed. Robert and me on our wedding day. Victoria and Thomas as children. Family vacations, holidays, ordinary moments that had become precious in retrospect. I added a new photo, one taken just last week. The four of us outside the courthouse after the final charges were dismissed. Me, Victoria, Thomas, and Sydney. We looked tired in that photo, but we also looked like survivors, like people who'd faced something terrible and refused to be destroyed by it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Maloney, this is Agent Rice from the FBI. Rebecca Morrison has agreed to cooperate with our investigation. Her testimony is going to help us shut down several other fraud networks. Thank you for your courage in coming forward. I replied, thank you for listening, and for believing that sometimes the truth is more complicated than it first appears. Another text came through, this one from Victoria. Love you, Mom. Thanks for not giving up on me. And from Thomas. You're the strongest person I know. Dad would be proud. I set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at my garden. The roses needed pruning. The lawn needed mowing. Life needed living. The ordinary daily work of maintaining a home and a life and a family. Rebecca Morrison had tried to destroy us. She'd been smart, prepared, ruthless. She'd had youth and technology and years of planning on her side. But she'd forgotten one crucial truth. Strength isn't about never being vulnerable. It's about being vulnerable, being hurt, being knocked down, and choosing to stand back up anyway. At 63, I'd learned that lesson dozens of times over. Through loss and grief and disappointment and fear, through raising children and burying a husband and navigating a world that often dismissed older women as irrelevant or obsolete. I'd learned patience. I'd learned to watch, to wait, to strike only when the moment was exactly right. I'd learned that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what matters and what doesn't, what's worth fighting for and what's worth letting go. Most importantly, I'd learned that the battles worth winning are rarely won through force or aggression. They're won through intelligence, through understanding human nature, through strategic thinking and careful preparation. Rebecca had been intelligent, but I had been wise, and in the end, wisdom had triumphed. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. Outside, the sun continued to break through the clouds, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear children laughing. Life went on. It always did. And I was still here to live it. Wiser, stronger, more aware of my own strength than I'd been before. That, I thought, was the real victory. Not the courtroom dramatics or the exposure of Rebecca's crimes, but the quiet knowledge that I had protected my family, that I had been tested and had not been found wanting. At 63, I was just beginning to understand the full extent of my own power. And heaven help anyone who underestimated me again. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.